Welcome back, everyone, to Broadcaster Hour. I'm Roger Hoover alongside Kyle Crooks. Typically at this time, we have a guest in the center of the screen, but Kyle, this is part of what's going to be a little bit of a break for us over the next 2 weeks. One of us is rather busy with something other than sports.
Yeah, that's right. Somebody's getting married. Somebody's ruining the flow of our podcast to get married, but congratulations to Roger. He is stepping away to get married, and also excited for sports coming back in the SEC as well. So exciting time for you, and I'm excited for you, my friend.
Well, thank you, Kyle. It means a lot to hear that. So for the next 2 weeks, we're going to not be having a guest, but we will be hearing from a lot of our guests. What we're going to do are a couple of best of episodes. And the first one coming up today, we will have the best of preparation, best of prep, as we're going over some of the great answers we've had to some of our questions from a lot of different guests, showing what's important for them, maybe on a football or a basketball spot chart, or if they're getting ready for a Major League Baseball game. Kyle, it's crazy. We've had now over 20 episodes, over 20 great guests, and we've learned so much from everyone that's already been on this show.
Yeah, it's interesting, Roger, because everyone has changed so much in how they prepare, right? So you have the Joe Davis, the Adam Amines who go with the online template, and then you have, the Neil Prices who we had on last week, who, he draws a lot of the stuff. He handwrites a lot of the stuff that he does. So it's so different in how a lot of different announcers go about their process. And selfishly, we like to, pick and prod their brains for every single thing they do. And it's interesting in every sport, because football, basketball, baseball, it's all drastically different for everybody. And it's exciting every week to see all the spot charts, see all the artwork. One that stands out to me is Tim Brando, and just how everything is handwritten, everything is colorful, everything looks like an art project for him. So there's a lot of guys that you just sit and you marvel at their process, but that's where everything starts, right? People don't everyone thinks you just pop on the air and you're able to do the job, and that's not the case. It all starts with the week of preparation, whether it's, some guys watch film, some guys don't, some guys read a lot of articles, some guys just like the face-to-face communication with their coaches or their analysts. So it's interesting to see how everybody from a week-to-week basis certainly changes in their preparation.
When you think about what a spotting chart is, it's basically the roster. You're basically getting all the stats, and then you're getting any notes. So you're taking a look at a lot of things, trying to combine everything into just one really easy to use chart and system for game day. And sometimes I think as broadcasters, I know I've been guilty of this. I imagine you'd say the same as well. And I know you'll say the same because I've seen your spot charts. Sometimes you just try to build and build and build, cram and cram and cram as much as you stuff in there. I love what Joe Davis said, and we'll get to that coming up in this episode, but really simple and rememberable stuff is just so much better sometimes than having everything on one page.
And that's what he called, right, Roger, the messy desk syndrome. Is when you throw, and man, am I guilty of this?
Same here.
You've seen my charts. They're absurd, and it's part of like this obsessive thing I have with trying to have every single thing on a legal sheet of paper, and it just can't happen that way. Sometimes you just have to memorize some things, and that just goes with reading articles. And I think the handwriting part of it, actually physically writing things down, can eliminate a lot of that messy desk syndrome on your chart. If you have notes off to the side, it's interesting because, I'll ask guys, how do you prepare for stories, right? You have the bare bones on charts, but what I like to figure out is if you're telling a story beginning, middle to end on a TV broadcast, there's more space to do that on TV than there is on radio. How do you make sure you give that story justice and have all the facts of that story, right? So you're not going to be able to fit a lot of that on a 11 by 17 spotting chart. You have to have other places to put that. So what I've learned a lot about is, one, not trying to clutter every single bio note that you have on a chart, but also have off to the side certain bullet points and things that you want to touch on. Joe Davis is big on, and West Durham, I know West Durham has those index cards, which are very big for him. And I believe Joe Davis said he had lists of things that he wants to touch on, like what's
storyline chart,
offensively, defensively. There's so many different ways, Roger, that you can sort through all this information that you just don't have to have that messy desk syndrome. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned, for sure.
Yeah, that was a really big takeaway for me and something that I'm going to think about for my next broadcast coming up. Joe talked about not only just memorizing the names and numbers and really having that, but he also talked about just memorizing a headline. He was able to look at me and say, I met Roger Hoover when he was with the Tennessee Smokies. If you're able to instantly look at a player and instantly have a quick headline, quick sentence about somebody, just think about how much that changes you watching the field, watching the monitor versus looking at your chart, if you can just know it. So that was one of my big takeaways from all the guests we've had. Is there anything else that, in talking about preparation, that you've heard that you'll try to incorporate into your next broadcast?
I think some of the best episodes are, like you look at Adam Amin's episode, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of that in these best of episodes. But the one thing I've started to do, and we mentioned how baseball is more of a storytelling type medium, and what I've started to use over the last couple of years and what you've used is Microsoft OneNote. Mm-hmm. So when I mention how do you try and find ways to bullet point stories, it's too hard for baseball and softball because it's every day, to turn over spotting charts and things like that. So using Microsoft OneNote for me, learning how to use that through seeing what Joe Davis does, seeing what Adam Amin does, and then having kind of the old school philosophy of having guys like Chip Carry-On who doesn't necessarily need all of that junk, and that's a good thing too. I think it's a good, when you have that 30,000-foot view of what old school guys do and what new school guys do, and you can mesh that, combine that to benefit yourself in a selfish way. I think that that's a great thing that we've learned in this podcast. Is there's really no one way to do all of this. And again, selfishly, we pick and prod, take so many different things from so many different guys. So that's been the best part about this.
And I do love that there is really a through line. One of our guests is Bob Kessling. And when I was in college, when I was a freshman in college, I used to sit next to him as he'd call some TV baseball games for the University of Tennessee. And one of the cool things he had were he had index cards full of every player with like one hole in the corner and a ring around it. And he would just go round and round through the lineup. And there were bullet points on each player. And now you think of it, everybody that uses OneNote is kind of using it. What Bob was putting on the index cards, it's the same thing on these OneNotes. So, a lot of preparation is universal. And I think coming up in this episode, we're going to hear from a lot of different broadcasters, but a lot of these things are pretty universal and, Kyle, are not going to change as time goes on because these are the best methods.
Yeah, I mean, and if you're an old school guy who does it a certain way, you're not going to change. And like you look 20 years from now, Roger, right? We'll probably have so much more technology in how to prepare and how to sort things, and we'll be the guys saying that we are not switching from Microsoft OneNote. We are not switching from our 11 by 17 legal charts. We are not going to do it. So, maybe one day we'll be those guys that have that old school type of method. It is fun to see. And football is a big one for both of us. We don't get to do it at our levels yet. But to see the differing spotting charts, that's such a fun one of the the best things about Twitter is on a game day, watching play-by-play guys tweet out the view from the booth with their spotting chart underneath. And I love to see how Eli Gold's spotting chart to me that's something that I want to try to shift more towards. I have right now a messy desk syndrome that we've talked about when it comes to a football chart of handwriting a lot of things, but I think Eli Gold has everything so neat, everything so perfectly planned out. And, when it's time to call demo games or whatever, I'll go back to that episode and I'll look at, okay, how does Eli have everything sorted? What kind of stats is he using? And making sure, too, that it's not messy for your spotter or statistician, whoever you may be working with, because they'll need that chart just as much as you do. And we've learned that in these episodes, too.
Yeah, and one quick thing on Eli, and I was blessed. I got to sit in the booth with him all throughout football season last year at Alabama. One of the things I did on my spotting chart was, especially for the demo games I was calling, I took off the offensive linemen having their own little blocks and sections because I just had offense down one side with the skill players who were going to touch the ball, defense in the middle, and then notes on the other side. But when I watched Eli call the game, and I watched his spotter, Butch Owens, who has spotted every game that Eli's called for the Crimson Tide, so many times Butch will point to, say, Alex Leatherwood, Alabama's left tackle. He'll point to him. He'll point down on the chart. Let's see if I can get it in front of the camera. There we go. Point down on the chart, and then he'll go like this. if it was like a good run for Najee Harris, and that meant it was like the key block was Leatherwood. And again, Butch uses that little hand motion like that. So, that's, again, something you just learn. And that's why, and Eli, too, knowing him as well, he still loves to tinker with his charts after all these years. He had a new basketball chart that he debuted for his SEC Network games last year. So the fun part of it is when we had these broadcasters over the spring and summer, this is the prep they have now, but know that they may change as time goes along too, and that's okay. That's what we do.
Yeah, I mean, just tinker, and we're all continuing to work on our craft, and it's so cool to see guys that have been at a certain spot for 30 plus years, like Eli Gold, or a guy like Bob Kessling who's been at Tennessee for a long time, and see that they're always consistently trying to get better and trying to tinker with things. So we ask our question, what's our excuse? If we're not trying to continue to go back and listen through work and analyze what we can do better to consolidate information that's easier for us to say on a broadcast. Those are the things that we're learning, and we've been lucky to have some pretty great guests in that regard.
Yeah, we certainly have been learning. So right now, just sit back, relax, because we have the best of preparation, especially looking at spotting charts and any notes that these broadcasters have getting ready for a broadcast. The best of is coming up next here on Broadcaster Hour.
This was Kansas City against Houston, and this would be the Kansas City offense. Offensive line, wide receivers to the side, kicker, punter, quarterbacks, running backs, flip the chart, set up in a defensive alignment with the defensive front, the linebackers, and the secondary, and notes on each player. Every player, there has to be something. It's just, for me, maybe a superstition that someone gets injured and I don't have anything. Obviously, you've got the height, you've got the weight, you've got age, you've got hometown, you've got how they were acquired, what school they went to, what year they're in, what team they previously played for. It's all color-coded, and this is all done by hand. Same version for the Houston Texans. I make the chart from scratch. From there, there'll be a secondary chart with just news and notes from that game. And that's going to be full by the end of the week. I start this process with just a piece of loose leaf paper, jotting down note after note after note. And then eventually by Sunday, it makes its way into a better form on a manila folder like this. Kansas City Chiefs, 4-1, 19-13 loss to Indianapolis on Sunday night. Was it an aberration? That's just a little note that I wrote next to it, just to remind myself. At the point that that game was played, they were undefeated. They lost to the Colts. They were held to 324 yards. They had 11 penalties for 125 yards. They haven't lost back-to-back home games since 2013. That was Andy Reid's first season. It's the 11th all-time meeting between these two teams. Chiefs have won 4 of the last 5. They've scored 4 touchdowns in their last 9 quarters. They had scored 12 touchdowns in their first 11 quarters. On and on. How much of this makes air? If you have a great game, not a lot. If the game goes south, the number goes up. Then I'll have another sheet. This is just from our production meetings with the teams. This is with Houston, with Bill O'Brien, with Deshaun Watson, with Will Fuller, and with J.J. Watt, and with Tashawn Gibson. Kansas City, same deal. With Andy Reid, with Patrick Mahomes, with Travis Kelce. And that's it. It's a lot. It probably is more than I need, but it's what I'm comfortable with, and it helps get me ready for the game. How often am I going to this and referring to it in game? Not a lot. I find during the process, a lot of it is absorbed in my brain, and that's why I can instinctually work it in when it's appropriate. and not just searching for something on my board and saying something randomly because I feel like I need to fill the airtime. It's supposed to be a feel process. It's supposed to be in the flow of conversation, and the hope is this kind of preparation can produce that on the air.
All right, we've gotten to our favorite part of the show, and we're talking about prep, and we're talking about charts. If we're talking some football, what's important for you to have on your football chart, and how's it organized?
Okay. Well, I've got two different kinds, and I'm glad you called me to go get these. All right. First of all, this is a preseason chart for the NFL, and it's a mess. But you try and keep the same preseason chart. That's the offense, and there's the defense. Now, once we get to the regular season in the NFL, it kind of looks like this. Okay, it's much more condensed, and you're going to say in a second, you're going to say, wow, that looks like a college chart, and you're right. Because the college chart, and this is a TV game, so it's not nearly as advanced from notes situation, because in TV, it's the analyst game. In radio, it's the play-by-play guy's game. So the TV chart in college is basically, same type deal. For me, the basic facts and filaments of the game in football become this. I have to have this in front of me taped down, and that's a drive chart and a scoring summary. And this is, if you're saying, well, where'd you come up with that? This is stolen from my dad. He had a drive chart and a scoring summary, and it helps you just keep track of how many times the teams had the ball, where they started from. I've expanded it now to where I put notes on there about red zone or turnover margins or things like that. I also do one of these every week, and that's a game card. It's basically, and this is the Falcons and Saints, so it's how many times they've met. It's team stats right here. What else is on the schedule? What have they done? Notes about the series, things like that. I mean, it's pretty elaborate, and it's all color-coded because I'm that guy in your neighborhood who has to have everything a certain color, and I have lots of torn-up cards. I also do individual team cards, and if you see it highlighted, that means they lead the team and are probably ranked in the NFL in that particular category, which is good. And here's the Saints, and if it's in red, you see it highlighted in red on the Saints card, that's what they did the first time they played. So, you kind of get an idea of how it sets up. Also on radio, and Roger, you know Chris Stewart, so he may have told you about this. This is the written play-by-play I keep in front of me during every game. And I have a system that it's kind of rogue, to be honest, but it allows me to keep third downs on the fly. It allows me to keep drives, summaries like that. I transfer the scoring summary, obviously, to the other card, but it also allows me to go back and say, like Atlanta had the ball for 16 plays and punted 3 times, and then on the 4th drive, they ran 4 plays after an interception and scored their first touchdown, that kind of thing. It just allows me to communicate the game quicker.
Getting into some of the preparation side of the business for a Fox college football game on a Saturday, can you take us through your week of preparation and what's most important to you, especially what's most important to have on your board?
Yeah. I say that I like to say that with football and basketball, if somebody gave me an assignment and said, you got to do this game tonight, you've only got a few hours to get ready, I would spend my time almost exclusively, just given a few hours, on memorizing names and numbers. Because if you're not A+ on delivering, number 26's name is, I'm looking at a board I have laying here, Sidney Jones. If I don't know that, like I know your name is Roger, I'm not going to be at my best. I don't have a chance to be as smooth as I can possibly be. So that's the biggest thing. And I'm doing that all week. Everybody has different ways of memorizing things. I like to write the numbers down left-hand column and quiz myself, kind of go down the page and write the names. And then I'll do the same thing. I'll write the numbers. I'll do it again. And I have notebooks filled with names and numbers just as I try to memorize. And then I also try to memorize a headline for each player, at least the guys that are going to touch the ball, or on defense, just about everybody. So I'm not just nailing, that I see your face and know you're Roger, but I'm also saying, met him when he was with the Tennessee Smokies, like a fact to introduce him with that can come without me looking down and searching to find it. I think to really be at your best, you've got to have those couple things: the immediate ID and enough knowledge to immediately introduce. Give me something about this guy. So that's a priority. And for some guys, that's all there's going to be. I don't want to have all this prep and all these stories just for the sake of having these stories and having this prep and feeling comforted by having a bunch of fine print on my board. I think that I did that early on, and the problem with that is I feel like I'm sitting at a messy desk. Like you pour all this information and you get so much information to absorb during the week. It's great, but if you don't prioritize it, for me, I would get into the game and be like, okay, holy crap, I got all this stuff, but where is it? Well, I know I read a story about this guy, but which guy was it? And I'd finish the game and I'd be like, God, I didn't even talk about the most important thing for that guy. I didn't even say that the team was looking for its first championship in however many years. That's the important thing. So finding a way to take all this information and narrow it down, refine it, and have your headlines. That's for the individual players, but it's also for the teams. I spend the week having putting together what I call a storyline chart, where I split the page in half, one team on one side, one team on the other, a headline for each, looking for their first 6-game winning streak in 5 years. On the other side, trying to move into first place in the division. Under that, maybe a headline about what their last game was, anything noteworthy from that. For football, I then do an offensive headline and a defensive headline and vice versa. And I'll introduce the groups with that. And that's something that I'll kind of go back to throughout the game as to update those key headlines and key storylines coming in. And then, you fill in the rest of the time with some of the minutia, some of the deep dive stories. But again, I'm not doing that on every single player. I'm reading everything I can find, but finding a way to sift through it and prioritize what I need to know and what the listener needs to know.
And you mentioned you had a board there. Could you hold that up to the camera so we can see what you're working with?
Yeah, I ran up to the attic and grabbed the first one I could find. It's completely random. It's Washington and Arizona State, I think 3 years ago. So I've got just a legal size folder, Arizona State offense, Washington defense, and vice versa. And I'll zoom it in so you can see a little more closely what I've got. Jake Browning, just to give you an example of what I was talking about with having a headline. Can you guys see that?
We can. That looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. So started career 4-5, 12-1 since mid-November last year. That at that point was kind of the story. He came in as a freshman and struggled. Chris Peterson's first year, they're about 500, but now they've turned into the best program in the Pac-12 with what he's done since he kind of settled in. Let's see, Levon Coleman. So I've got it highlighted there in the extra bold font, 9 yards a carry. So the first time Levon Coleman touches the ball, I'm going to know it's Levon Coleman, like I'm going to know my mom's name. I'm going to see 22. I'm going to know that's Levon Coleman, and I'm going to know, how do I tell you who Levon Coleman is? Beyond who he is, who is he, right? Here's Levon Coleman, 9 yards per carry. If I'm listening, whoa, okay, I know this dude's a big play threat. Same thing with Myles Gaskin. First carry of the day from Myles Gaskin. More than 1,000 yards on the season. That's enough to get me going. You see that's highlighted in red, and I color code everything. But all I really highlight, you flip it over, Arizona State defense, all I really highlight in yellow is that headline that I'm going to be prepared to introduce the player with. So something as simple as you see DJ Calhoun, the leading tackler. I now know who DJ Calhoun is, more or less. And as the game goes on, I'm going to get deeper into it. I've got more detailed stories on the guys as you dive in deeper into the board. But just the ability to be able to introduce who the guy is. And that's the individual player side of it. I've got stat categories. I highlight good ones in yellow, bad ones in blue. Little sections here on the group as a whole. This is the section I think that's probably evolved most for me through the years. That used to be filled with information about the unit, but I don't know. I just found that was like the messy desk syndrome. Do I need all that? I know it from reading it. Do I really need to have it all bogged down on here? But again, it's still, I haven't figured it out. I'm still trying to figure it out and still evolving the way I do it all the time.
And when you want to also, when you have your coaches meetings and things like that, are you putting that on your board? Or is that a separate area where you're putting all that extra information?
Yeah. So kind of the whole week, Kyle, for me goes into this board. From the time that I get the 2 deeps on Sunday night or Monday morning or whenever I begin it, all my prep gets thrown into that board. And then the last thing I do is clean it up and prioritize. And that even in some cases involves deleting stuff that's just too much and that I know I don't need. It's overkill. So yeah, I've got my computer out during the coaches meetings. Sometimes we'll do a conference call with a visiting team during the week, like Wednesday. A lot of times we'll do them in their hotel on Friday when we get to the site. Pretty much always do the home team on site Friday morning. And I'm typing in notes, and it's still not real pretty yet as I'm typing those notes in. But I'm also typing those notes in through the week as I'm reading articles each day, as I'm reading the game notes, as I'm going through the media guide and going back and reading all the long feature articles about guys from their career. But yeah, right up until typically, say we have our last meeting Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Well, from 3 until dinner at 7, I'm really honing it all in, cleaning these boards up, exporting them to PDF, sending them off to get printed, and then the following morning before the game, following afternoon, depending on what time of day the game is, I then do all this highlighting, which is kind of my last, like, sit down, take a deep breath, really focus and start to get that game face on, get the mind in correct position to be able to go through and highlight what's important.
And when you meet your analyst at whatever city you're calling a game, how much film are you watching? Any film with your analysts as they break down the X's and O's? You kind of soak that in as well, so you know that when you see something happen or they want to replay and they want to go in a certain direction, you know what they've seen on tape and they've talked about before the game.
Yeah, I have. I've done a little bit of that. It's not part of my process necessarily because it's not been a part of any of my analyst process. I don't think where they want me there to like explain it, but I think it happens throughout the week. We discuss those things through email. So currently my partner is Brock Heward. He'll send me a clip or two that he finds as important and noteworthy, and I know that he's going to be focused. And he'll send that on Tuesday as he's breaking down film. So it's kind of an ongoing conversation throughout the week.
And along those lines as well, getting ready for a broadcast with this football, you're always getting ready, a week-long preparation for a big game, a 3-hour, 4-hour broadcast. But in terms of your Dodgers work for baseball, it's every day. Sometimes there are quick turnarounds, but you're still putting on a 3 to 4, sometimes even longer show in front of a huge audience. Just what's the production kind of meeting schedule like for the Dodgers day-to-day? How much are you guys doing that during the season?
I should find out who said this because I use this all the time. But somebody said you prepare a week to call a football or basketball game. You prepare your whole life to call a baseball game. And it's kind of true, right? Like everything you've ever read and all the stories you've ever heard, there's a chance that stuff comes up on a given night in baseball. Because it's every single day. I think that one of the great things about our producer, Mike Levy, is he understands that getting too regimented in terms of meetings and schedules, it's going to kill you. It's going to drive you into the ground. It's not going to kill you, right? I mean, we're still talking about baseball. It's not hard, but to be at your best and really have a smile on your face in some of those dog days, it's important. I think Mike realizes to not have too much of a regimented schedule. He'll swing into the booth 3:30, 4 o'clock, and say, "Hey, what do you think about this for the Open tonight? We'll talk about this," right? And Oral and I probably say, "Yeah, that sounds great," or maybe we have an idea. Why don't we do this instead? Good. And then because you do it so often, the stuff once you get into the game, and this goes back to the benefit of having a relationship with the producer that builds over the years, you kind of just know where one another's going in that prep. And then individually, the prep for baseball for the Dodgers, a lot of it is living the season. And the previous day, having been there and called that's a big part of it. I also spend time each morning reading all the articles from the night before and just making sure that, I'm kind of thinking along with the narratives that are out there, the storylines that are out there, making sure I'm not missing anything in my own mind and my own observations of the game. I think it's important to be around the cage most days, not every day. Get down there and talk with the players. And I'm not necessarily going down there like looking for a quote or looking to get something. You kind of let it happen. Again, playing the long game. If you're down there 162 days in a row with a notepad and a pen, you're going to be a nuisance. And I never want to be a nuisance to the guys I'm covering. So I let those relationships develop and let the information come through on a semi-regular basis through that route. I do starting pitchers for each night's game, really do a lot of work on that. I typically do that when I get home for the next day. So 7 o'clock game at Dodger Stadium, get back home at 11 o'clock that night, spend an hour on the next day's starting pitchers and have those ready to go. So the following day when I wake up, I'm more focused in on the bigger picture.
Yeah, and that's where I was going to go next. For you, when we started in the minor leagues, everybody had the Bob Carpenter scorebook. Everyone was really focused on making that book as shined as much as it could be. I know I got in that trap a lot early on, but for you, I know now you basically just keep score with what's printed out for the media, and then a lot of your news and notes is all in your OneNote. Can you kind of take us through what's important you have in OneNote?
Yeah, I have everything in OneNote. It's like my baseball brain in digital form. I'm assured that you can't back the thing up apparently, but I'm assured it's fine up in the cloud. My God, it better be, because if that thing goes, I might just quit. So you're right. I started scoring. I had a scorebook my first as recently as my first year doing Dodger games, but starting in 17. Or actually late in 16, I gave it a try. I went to just the score sheet that's produced as standard across every major league press box. And I kind of looked at it as the first few games almost like jumping in the pool without floaties for the first time. Like, oh God, I don't know if I'm going to be able to swim. I might need these floaties to swim. But you get in and you're like, wait a minute, I'm good and this is comfortable. I don't need these. So what I found is I spend so much time reading this stuff. I spend so much time preparing. I don't need every little detail bogged down on my scorecard. And this freed me up. It freed me up just mentally, having a clean sheet in front of me and allowing my brain to work as opposed to being a prisoner to what's on my score sheet and on my scorebook. And it freed me up just from a time budgeting standpoint. There's a lot of busy work that goes into filling those score sheets out. And so when instead of spending an hour writing all the names and numbers in there, I'm spending an hour talking to players and coaches. I'm spending time talking to the manager. I'm talking to the other broadcasters, stuff that would be devoted to filling out that scorebook if I hadn't made the decision to go to this process.
Joe, what percentage of what makes the air do you think is from those conversations day of? Because when you're a team announcer in baseball, you're there every day, and sometimes it can be hard, maybe not for the Dodgers, but to find certain storylines to keep it fresh. So that's a way to keep it fresh, right? Continue to have those conversations day of.
Yeah, exactly. Oral and I always say, because there are some days we're like, are we going down today? I don't know. We're tired. Are we really going to go down to batting practice? We're always glad when we do. We always come back saying, you know what, that's the best thing we got for tonight. That 5-minute conversation we just had with Max Muncy, that's the best stuff we're going to have. Without fail, that winds up being the case. When you invest that time to go get the intel down by the cage or in the manager's office, it's always worth it. I mentioned this a minute ago, cognizant of not being a nuisance. I probably lean too far towards that. I don't want to get in the guy's ways. I don't want to be somebody who they're like, what do you need? I probably worry too much about that and could be more aggressive getting the extra information, because that's our job, right? Like we're a liaison between, we have that access that the fans at home don't. And especially now with how much great stuff there is on the internet, Fangraphs, and we all know about Baseball Reference and Baseball Savant and all these websites where anybody can access the numbers and the facts. What they can't do is they can't walk up to Cody Bellinger at the cage and ask him how his swing's feeling. So the more of that I can do, the better. I think that the more that I'm able to bring something of value if I'm doing those things.
John went to law school. He got his law degree, never practiced law. but he prepared the games as if he was going to go, battle a court, go to the Supreme Court and try and win a case. And I mean, he had basically a board in front of him, clipboard in front of him, and he'd have a stack of notes about that big. And periodically during the game, he'd flip through those notes. Now, I bet he didn't use 30% of them, but he still had those notes in front of him. And they were typewritten. So you knew all week, all he was doing was making sure he had the information in case there was something came up during the broadcast, he would need that little nugget. But his preparation was unbelievable. He was the most prepared broadcaster I've ever been around. But that was his style. That's how he thought he needed to do things. And most of his pregame and it was all scripted out because that's just the way he did it. And I'm totally different from that. I can't script anything because I think you need to be more. I need to be more spontaneous. But there are other guys that script everything. And so it just depends on how, if you're more comfortable with that script in front of you, then do it. But if you're not, you got to be yourself.
Basically, when I get on a plane Sunday from where I'm at, I start prepping for the next game. And so I'm going through, I have a database that I keep on all the teams. And so I save notes and save things like throughout the year on every team. So, I just start reading a ton. Sunday night, Monday, I just read a ton and go back and go through my database and just take notes, read articles, everything I get my hands on. Tuesday, I start watching some of their past games, see what they're doing, see who's playing, see what personnel packages they use, see maybe the storylines that the other broadcasters have done the last week or two, because I don't want to necessarily repeat those to death. Because, while you're getting every week the games go to different areas of the country, they're also going to the diehard fan bases. So you don't want to bludgeon the same storyline to death. So just paying attention to stuff like that. And then Wednesday, I'll usually start working on my stuff. So Wednesday, I have my friend Matt Park from Syracuse who helps put these boards together for me, like the skeleton version. He does a great job with it. And then I go through and I go through all my notes through the things that the team send and just flat out Google and put things that I think are interesting in there. I mean, the things that I wouldn't say there's a specific thing for each player that I have. Each player is a little different. Like I go more for storyline. So I'm not just jamming a million stats in there. I'm going, for what they were. Did they lead the league? Or the last 2 games, have they had 20 catches? Or, what's their backstory? My biggest thing is having, by the time the game rolls around, having something on every player, because inevitably the last person on the roster will, block a field goal and return it for a touchdown. And you have to know who that is. So, Wednesday I'm grinding on that, Thursday grinding on that. Usually Thursday we fly out to the cities. And then Friday morning we go to the home team's practice and we get access to their coaches and players, which is great. I mean, we get a lot of insight there. Saturday we do the visiting team. And then Saturday night we have a big production meeting with our crew. So we go over video, what we have on tap, video for the game that we can use. We don't have to, but some of the special things that our crew has made during the week. Graphics, we go over all those so we go through all these graphics and everything. And then we just talk about it. Like, hey, do we like this? Do we like that? If I'm like, I don't love that graphic because I don't really think it's in, displays how they've been playing or whatever, we toss it. So, and then we're ready for the game. We wake up and do the game, and it's like studying for a midterm. If you studied and you're ready, the game is a blast and it's fun. You're ready to go. And there's just constant communication. The difference with radio and TV is radio, it's you basically. And in television, it's a team, constant communication. Your analyst, sideline person, producer, director, people are constantly talking to each other. What do we want to do next? All right, after this play, we're going to do this. We've got a game break here. We're going to roll this packages. And after this play, if it's not a big play, it's just constantly talking to make the broadcast good. So the team element is really, really fun. But Dan, the bottom line is the preparation doesn't stop. I stop it Saturday night because otherwise you could just go over the cliff. You could just read, and watch till the cows come home because the information is overload. So Saturday night when I go to bed, that's the end of it. I don't prep at all Sunday morning. I just show up to the game. That's kind of the way to clear my mind.
When you guys talk to the athletes that you cover too, you experience some of this where you're keeping a track. Okay, That's what they said. I can use that and I can bridge it to tell this story, and it can add to this story that I want to tell later on in the broadcast. So I'm constantly thinking, like if I was talking to Ty Harris, who was the point guard for South Carolina, if she tells me something about Aaliyah Boston, I can remember that, write it down, and add it to something later on in the broadcast when it comes up. I think that's the fun part. It's like putting together a puzzle when you're doing the game, because you want to, obviously the first thing is to document the game, make sure we see what happens, but then you can weave in these stories that you found by talking to players, by talking to the coaches, by just being around the team all season. And that's kind of an insight that other people don't get to see. The viewers don't get to see every day. They're not going to practices. So that's one of the things that I love too. And sometimes those stories you can get them mixed up in your head. Like there's so many different things I want to do. So this year I thought it was really great. Our crew, we started doing a card. So I had a note card, and my producer, Lori Mancini, and I, before each game, we would say, what are the stories you want to get in? And I would write down a bullet point. And she has the same card in front of her in the truck. So if there's an opportunity, I'm not going to force anything in. If a story doesn't fit, then you can't tell it. Maybe save it for another game. But if there's something on that card that I really want to talk about and I see an opportunity to do it, I'm going to put it in, and then we would check it off the list. It's a little reminder, because as you guys know, sometimes you get caught up in the game, you're thinking about something else, and you kind of forget about those stories that you wanted to tell before. So that was a really good way this year that I think that we were able to get some stories in. And if she saw an opportunity and I wasn't thinking about it, she could get in my ear and say, hey, don't you want to tell this story right here? And I'm like, oh, absolutely I do. Yes. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was a good way. And that really helped me to kind of refocus on what the big storylines were.
This is the chart for Alabama and Michigan. Okay. That's the game, the bowl game last year. I don't know how well you can see things here, but here's quarterback Mac Jones. Above it, it says 6'2", 205 RSSO. So he's a 6'2", 205-pound redshirt sophomore. It says Jacksonville, Florida. Then it says Bowles, Bolles in parentheses. That's his high school's name. And I have the same for every player. Then I have L is last game. The statistics right here. Last game, which would have been the Auburn game, 26 of 39, 66.7% efficiency, 335 yards passing, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And then underneath it, there's a category that says S, and that's the season statistics. So if he throws another touchdown against Michigan, well, I could look, he had 11 coming in for the year. So that's his 12th touchdown pass of the year. So it's right there in front of me. Then I have all sorts of biographical information that I will update throughout the course of the year. Some of it I don't update at all. Some I do. But it says 2019 Academic Excellence Award. 3 games started, 11 games played in 19. Career passing and rushing numbers coming in. All sorts of stuff. His career highs, his stuff in high school. 94, it says 94 TDP Waddle versus VULL. That's a 94-yard touchdown pass to Jalen Waddle against Louisiana Lafayette in 18. Second longest in Alabama history. I have 4 and a star. So he was a 4-star top 20 pro-style quarterback coming out of high school. Then I have written in, for instance, let me take somebody else here. Mm-hmm. Let's go to Najee Harris. Same basic thing here. Although you see in Najee's case, you have something in orange right here. And it says 2 SEC, which means he's on the second team All SEC as voted by the coaches for that season. But I will have number 1 in a circle down here. You probably can't see it. It's in pencil. It says 1 rush, 5.9 L31 LSU, which means he is the number 1 rusher on the ball club, averaging 5.9 yards a carry. L31 means his long rush was 31 yards against LSU. Same thing underneath that number. It says 5 in a circle. 5 REC, the number 5 receiver on the ball club. 11.3 L42 USM. He's averaging 11.3 yards per reception, a 42-yarder against Southern Mississippi. So I have all of these things for both teams, for whether it's for Alabama or for Michigan, and I do color code everything just because I do. Here's the Michigan chart for the same game, and whether it's Michigan or whether it's Alabama, you'll see some green highlighted splotches across the thing. That's anybody who's from the state of Alabama, just to reference it. So if the Michigan guy is making a play, Devin Gill, whatever it is, or whatever, anybody, you have it in front of you, so you don't have to start searching. Then, of course, I have stuff that you should know, but just in case you forget. Head coach Nick Saban. Then underneath that, I have Brian Baker, associate head coach. Jeff Banks, special teams. Scott Cochran, strength and conditioning. Charles Huff, associate head coach. Then underneath that, since this is the offense, I have Steve Sarkisian as the offensive coordinator. Jeff Banks, tight ends coach. Kyle Flood, O-line. Charles Huff, running backs. Holman Wiggins, wide receivers. So if I need to say something about a particular position coach, and if I don't want to start thinking about it, it's right there in front of me. Then I have the team comparison stats. This box right here is Bama offense, Michigan defense. And then the next chart, if this is the Alabama defense, would have Bama defense, Michigan offense. And on the Michigan charts, it's the same thing, Michigan offense against Alabama. And this way, it shows me exactly what the numbers are. First line is scoring. Alabama averaging 48.3 points per game. Michigan's defense giving up only 19.5. And then underneath it, in those little green boxes, it is, if it's in a green box, that means they're in the top 20 in the nation. It says, well, maybe you can see here, it says Bama offense, and underneath it, it says SEC, and then FBS. So it shows me immediately that Bama is first in the SEC in scoring, and second in America. Then it shows me for Michigan, they are fifth defensively in scoring in the Big Ten, and they are 18th in America. And every category in defense and offense is there: scoring, rushing, passing, efficiency, and so on. I have the schedules with the scores of every game on every chart. I have the score by quarters down here at the bottom. So if that comes into conversation. And then a few little things that I do. Some of the numbers, like you'll see Evan Neal up here, right there. His number is pink. Well, it's a black number on a pink box. Anybody in a pink box is a true freshman. So you don't even have to look it up. You don't even have to look to see where he is or anything. If it's in a pink box, he's a true freshman. So things of that nature are on there. I have the punters here and the place kickers. And then down here I have the holder and the long snappers. Everything that I will need, hopefully, is on these charts, so I don't have to start, searching during the game. And then, of course, for the other team, I will also have in a contrasting color. For instance, up here, the defensive end, you'll see that I have his name written phonetically because I'm not familiar with him all that well. And his first name is Kwity, last name is Paye. I don't want to have to think about it, so it's pronounced Quitty Pay, and I just write that in phonetically, as I do for anybody whose name might be a little bit unusual. But again, the same thing for the other team. Here are the coaches, Here's Harbaugh and all of his assistant coaches and the defensive coaches and so on. Here are all the comparison stats I talked about. Bama's offense, Michigan defense. So during a game, I'll have the Alabama offensive chart here, the other team's defensive chart here. Then I'll flip them over when the ball changes hands, and it's still offense and defense, but it'll be Michigan's offense and the Bama defense. So, but I mean, I have everything, even in Michigan's case, when they played a team that was nationally ranked. Not only do they have the game and the score and the date and all that, but I write in number 13. So Wisconsin was 13th in the nation the day they played them. Then down here, 14 is Iowa. They were 14th, Iowa was, the day they played them, and so on. So I can look quickly and say, well, they've played 6 teams that are nationally ranked coming into the ball game today. So that's what I basically have. It's a long week of preparation, but it pays off come Saturday.
Certainly does, and we appreciate you showing us those charts.
I send it to a guy who puts it into that nice, neat format for me. Then he ships it to my FedEx office location here in Birmingham. I go down and pick it up. But so that's the procedure. But I'll start on that on Monday, and wait for the national rankings statistically to come out and all that stuff, and then it's very quickly turned around because I have to have this by Wednesday night or Thursday, because when I do the Nick Saban show Thursday, A, I'm staying in Tuscaloosa for the rest of the weekend if it's a home game, and B, I want to have this in front of me during that Saban show in case, he talks about Joe Blow from Michigan, and I can say, yeah, Khaleke Hudson, he was a second team All Big Ten last season, and here it is written down, and he's the number 1 tackler. That's what else I do defensively. In yellow, I will have number 1 T, number 5 T, number 10 T, the number 10 tackler on the ball club. And again, the statistics, like I did last week, like I showed you for the offense, here they're defensive statistics: 59 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, a fumble caused, 5 quarterback hurries. So everything that's on the stat sheet is transferred to these charts, so I'm not sitting and shuffling papers on game day.
And you mentioned as well, when you're calling the game, you have that spot chart, of course, is a great resource, but when you're physically calling the game and you use the binoculars, just where do you watch the snap through the binoculars? When do you ever take the binoculars away? How do you really use that to help enhance your call?
I use the binoculars until it is clear what the play is. If it's a running play, I keep them up in my, on my face. I'll stay with them right until the end of the play. If it's clear it's going to be a passing play, well, as soon as the quarterback drops back to throw, I'll pull the binoculars down so I can see who's where and what's going on and who might be free and so on and so forth. Sometimes I will, well, more often than not, I'll double check myself, even though I do have a great spotter, as I mentioned in Butch. He'll point out who's deep on a kickoff. He'll point to the guy on the chart because, on these charts, I even have a section for returns. So, and he'll point to, all right, number 8, and he'll point to the far side of the field. And then he'll point to number 23, and he'll go like this, means he's to the near side vis-a-vis the press box. But I always double check. That's just the way I am. So I'll put the binoculars up and make sure it's 8 over there and 23 over here. And we do that more in certain games when you're playing Tennessee and they have those hard to read numbers and so on. But during a regular play, though, the binoculars are up for the entire play if it's a run, and for until the quarterback drops back on a passing play.
I'll start with basketball because I do my own boards for basketball, and I don't know if you can see these here. I do them on Microsoft Word, and it comes on an 11, or let's see what size. 11. This is legal size, a legal size manila folder, and a legal size just regular printer paper. So it's what's that, 11 by 14, I think is what it is. And I've got both teams in hoops. One team on one side. This was number one Louisville and Eastern Kentucky last year, and then one team on the other. And then it goes by number and player name, which I have really big, height, weight, points per game, rebounds per game. And then out here is kind of my area where I'll have 4 bullet points with every single player for the most part. I mean, and especially the starter, sometimes I'll have a little bit more. And those are nuggets that I'll get to if that guy, kind of goes off. He's at the free throw line. I got a chance to maybe work something in. If it's something the coach told me maybe during shoot around, I've got some stuff there. And then underneath, I've got just some basics on stories. So underneath my roster, just some basic storylines I can get to. Some of it's handwritten in there after shoot arounds. A lot of it is typed up. And it's nice and tidy. I like to have my workspace clean. I can't have Post-it notes all over the place. I can't have, this storyboard here and the roster here, my board there. I don't function that way. I have to have one nice and tidy little thing that I made so I know where everything is, and then and just go from there. I don't have the coach, the record for the teams, and all that stuff. I'd say it's probably, in terms of intel, it's probably standard for most play-by-play guys. There's some guys that do more than this. There's some guys that do a lot less. So it's whatever works for you. But for basketball, I make every single one of these boards, bring them to shoot around. They're ready to go, and they're good to go. Now, those are easy, especially if you have a package in the same conference like I've done the SEC the last couple of years. And I can just kind of repurpose those with updated intel before every game. Football is an entirely different animal. This is UAB Tennessee last year as the Vols kind of got their deal going. I think they reel off 7 or 8 wins, 6 or 7 wins in a row to close down the season. And this is much more detailed. This board is made for me by a service. They do a pretty good job with it. They send me, just the players. I have it mapped out by position. Here's all my running backs. Here's my quarterbacks, the offensive line up top, receivers all on one side. I've got a schedule and those things. But the thing is, in football, there's many more handwritten notes. And so this is all from our coaches' meetings. And they're basically just triggers for any kind of intelligence or stories that we can put on a broadcast. I would say, at ESPN, there's more of a priority on storytelling. And, you document the game first and foremost. Don't misconstrue that. But if I'm sitting there telling you that Jarrett Garantano last year completed, 54% of his passes in the red zone, and I'm spitting out stat after stat, I'm going to be putting people to sleep. I think play-by-play has gotten away from the basics of that in the last 10 years or so, much more than, let's say, the previous 50 years. And what I mean by that is there's more of a priority with a lot of companies and networks on storytelling. And Roger, I know you and I have talked about this a good bit. Storytelling, being entertaining, while also documenting the game in a proper way, is a pretty big deal because a lot of people can just get out there and say, well, it's a 5-yard game, 3rd and 4 coming up. Tennessee's 40% on 3rd down this year. They're 94th in the country in 3rd down conversion. Yeah, most of the fans that care about that probably already know that. So what can I tell them that they don't know? How can we present this in a way that is not boring, but is not over the top? And it's not that you want to become bigger than the game. You never want to do that. But it's certainly a different vibe and a different spiel, I think, than even a decade ago. And you can say, well, why is that? Well, the answer is because people have so many other things to do. A lot of people are watching the game and looking at their phone and scrolling through social media. A lot of people are watching the game from a bar. Maybe the sound's on, maybe it's not. A lot of people are doing 2 other things, whatever they may be, while they're watching the game. And so that's important. You have to take that into account, I think, in broadcasting. And I think, as a society, we're all learning, okay, well, what does this mean? And what do people want to hear? What's too much? What's not enough? And so, again, that's evolving. And I think it's very important. Evolving is a key word in life and also just in what we do. But my football boards are much more detailed. To get ready for a football game takes me all damn week. I mean, I love doing it. I love the prep work. Basketball, it's boom, boom, boom. It's a 2-hour broadcast. Football can be 4.5 hours, and there's just so much at stake. So football, we're talking to the head coaches, both coordinators, both quarterbacks, and usually a handful of other players to try to get a feel for what's happening and to get some stories, and understand what makes these guys or girls who they are, and what story do they have to tell. What story does Jarek Garantano or Mac Jones have to tell that we haven't heard yet, or Najee Harris or Trevor Lawrence? And, for the bigger teams, that's a more difficult find, and it requires more work. For a team like UAB a year ago that resurrected itself like a phoenix from the ashes just 2 seasons ago, I mean, there was a ton for us to get into in that game because, Bill Clark is a badass, and most of the country doesn't know about him. So, that's a little easier to tell that story because not as many people know. But for the bigger programs, buddy, you got to work, and it's not just reading the game notes and saying, well, they've won 4 games in a row and they've never lost on this date in history. No, a lot of people are reading the game notes themselves. You got to come up with something a bit more compelling than that. So the football boards are based on a lot of that and handwriting stuff out, committing it to memory, and just getting ready to be able to tell those stories quickly, concisely, and entertaining manner whenever you're given that ability or given that opportunity.
I'm basically just going to yield the floor to Professor Price. We understand you have football, basketball, and baseball charts ready to go, so I'll just kind of let you start with football. We'll go to basketball and baseball, and then we'll pick it up from there.
No, you said bring charts, so I have brought charts. So this is what the football chart started as, and hope you can see that. I'll hide behind it. Your screen will just improve because I'm gone here. This is kind of a combination of a couple of guys. There is some Bob Kessling in here because of the manila folder, and there is some Woody Durham in here because Woody had the boxes. Now, this is a spring game chart from a couple years ago, so you got the same team on there. But the reason I kind of got away from it was if you look at it, it looks pretty busy. There's a whole lot of stuff on there. And this is just a spring game, mind you. This is not even an actual game with 2 teams playing. But it's basic. It's 2 or 3 deep, depending on the guys that play at a given position. You've got the vitals below. There are no stats on this one just because it's a spring game. And then all the stuff in green on the periphery here, these are things that I thought were important to talk about, or things that I wanted to try to touch on over the course of the game with Matt and with Jay. So that's what you see in that one. And specialist always off on the side just because I think it's easier to keep up with. You see I've got down here questions specifically I want to talk to Jay about. It's kind of stream of consciousness. Once you get beyond the boxes, anything kind of goes in the margins. So I just found it to be a little bit too busy, and maybe more importantly, my spotter found it to be too busy and made it tough for him to pick up on where he needed to go to find the information quickly. So that evolved into what we've been using for the last 2 years, which comes primarily from Jack Crystal. Matt White, I told you, does the games with me. Matt played in the Cotton Bowl. I think the last year he was on the state team in '99, and Jack's daughter was kind enough after Jack passed to give Matt a spot board with his name on it from that Cotton Bowl game against Texas. So Matt shows that to me after we go speak to a group one night in North Mississippi, and I said, this would really work. So it's 2 boards, not 1, but basically Jack had all these squares, and every player on his board got a square. They don't all get a square on mine. I like to split the squares up, again, because you just got so many guys who play. But this would be defense. So State was playing with 4 down linemen. So the guys at the very top were the starters, and then falling in behind with regard to where they are on the 2 deep. Linebackers here, corners, and safeties. And again, you've got the name, the vitals, stats in red, anything that's significant there. I don't put stats down for everybody in football because there are just too many of them. And if it's something that's relevant, if they lead the league or they're in the top, in the league in certain categories, it's worth putting on there. But I don't reference the numbers a ton outside of situations, third downs, what they need to do there. And then on the other side, you've got the opposing defense. So in this case, Tennessee's defense from the game in Knoxville. And more information, just because I knew the state team pretty well by that point, and the Tennessee team's the one that you're only going to see one time. So more there in the event that something comes up that's noteworthy. And the same thing on offense. So offensive line at the top, then you've got wide receivers, tight end, over here, and then quarterback, running back, wide receivers, and all the specialists again down the side, and coaches down here in the event you need to reference anything there. Same thing for Tennessee on offense. And again, vitals. I color code everything just because it's easier for me to pick up on, even the teams. And sometimes it's hard to find the right color to match the right team, but we try to get as close as we can with that. And I handwrite it every week, for better or for worse, and it is a process. I will tell you that. A lot of those lines are drawn in by hand, too, to separate some of those boxes, depending on if we need 3 or even 4 deep at a given position late in the year, or injuries or anything else that pops up. So, and I find it just helps me to remember. Woody Durham told me he did everything by hand, and the reason he did it by hand was because he'd remember it. I used to do it on a computer, and I didn't think I could retain the information. And when I started doing it all by hand, it was much better for me. And even though it takes longer, it's worth, I think, the extra investment and the time. Speaking of Woody, okay, basketball. So this is the game that never happened. The last game that I was supposed to do was Tennessee and Alabama at the SEC tournament in Nashville. And I walked on the floor about an hour before we were supposed to go on the air, and Phil Brame met me before I got to the free throw line, and he said, "We're done. We're not going to play." And so this was the chart. And you won't see any scoring or anything like that on there because the game never happened, but you will see the notes and the preparation and hopefully gather something from that. This is a much larger version of something like Woody Durham used at Carolina, and that's where I got the idea from. And you've got all your players, guys that maybe don't play as much. I split the lines at the bottom to save space just in case they get in the game. You want to be able to say something about everybody, I think, when they get in because they've earned a spot. Up here, number of games they played, and in parentheses, a number of times they fouled out or been disqualified. Name, vitals. Over here in red, I do points, rebounds. If they have an assist, a steal, or a block number that's significant, that'll make it on there too. Blue is field goal percentage, and then in parentheses, the number of 3-point field goals they've made. Green is free throw percentage, and in parentheses, the number of attempts that a player's had at the free throw line. And then nobody, I'm looking to see, does anybody on this roster, no one has a number note of any kind, but if there's a significance to the number that they wear, I'll note that in this box. Down here, James Bolden, Beetle. Beetle was a nickname, so I put Beetle there in the number spot just to have a little more space. And notes out here, I also keep scoring these columns for the players. I'll keep a running score in the margins here to try and keep up with runs, things that might happen in a game. And then bigger stories at the bottom, maybe 1 or 2 small ones on a team up here at the top in the margins. Again, it's very stream of consciousness. What comes into your mind, where do you have space to write it? That's kind of how it works for me. I'm looking to see if there's anything else on here. Well, there's one less team on here now, I can tell you that. I've had this folder for years. My mother worked in a hospital for 49 years, and they'd have these old doctor's charts lying around, and she'd pass along these old doctor's charts, and they made great covers for the basketball score sheets. So that's how I got into using them.
I use a very color-coded score. I don't write a lot of notes in it, first of all. I'll put the full names and the number and the position in the lineup. I'll write it small so that I have some space for extra guys. I'll put the defense and I'll put the pitcher, and I write in the standings, and that's it. I go. I don't put any notes. I don't put their batting averages. I really don't care about batting averages or anything like that anymore. I used to be so stat heavy, and now I am 100% the opposite. I am completely done with stats. I almost don't care about them at all at this point, because for what we're trying to do on the radio and on these broadcasts is tell stories and be entertaining. And I don't think anyone is entertained by somebody's weighted on base average. Now, I might know it, and I might give it to you in a totally different way, where I'll say, based on this stat, which means this, Ahmed Rosario gets on base the fourth most among shortstops in the National League. But I will never tell you what those numbers are, because they don't matter. Who cares? Who cares what his weighted on base average is? It matters what it is in relative to everybody else. So I'll try to give you that before I give you any numbers. I don't want to overload you with numbers. I want to be able to say that Ahmed Rosario gets on base more than any other shortstop in the National League, but nobody's going to regurgitate that his on base average is 360. It doesn't matter. So I think I tried to focus on it in those ways. So that's why I don't really write those numbers in my book. The only time I'll write things in my book is if a note comes along. If someone stole 3 bases in a game for the first time in 6 years, I'll jot that down in my book. I like that. I like those kind of numbers or stats where you can go back and say, somebody had Lucas Duda had a 3-homer game at Citi Field, and it was the 3rd 3-home run game at a Mets home game ever. Which is, I find remarkable for a team that's almost 60 years old. They've only had 3 home run games in their home ballpark in their team history. So you mentioned that. You talk about the other 2 times it happened. Which one was Kirk Neuenhuis, and you kind of make a little story out of that. I rather that than me tell you how many home runs Duda's now got off right-handed pitcher this year. Like, who cares? So that's where I'm at with all that stuff. So my book's pretty clean. I like it clean. The only thing that stands out about my book is that it's completely color-coded. I use green marker for singles. I use orange marker for triples, blue for doubles, red for strikeouts. I use purple for errors. Everything has its own color. So that's where you'll open my book and you'll see this rainbow of colors. So it stands out in that way. But again, that's just for when I can glance down and see blue and I know it's a double. I don't have to say, is that a 2 or a 3? I don't have to do anything. I just look at the colors and I know what I've got in there.
Getting that information and color coding it, and I did it with Marks-a-Lots, in those days, that was part of the prep for me. That's the fun of the job. So I pretty much do the same thing now. I get a great deal of my preparation done other ways with additional help today from other resources, but I still have to do my boards my way. I can take some of their information, but I've got to construct it on cardboard or on a really big, and I do mean big, board. And the older I get, the bigger the board gets. It's so big, I can't put it in an overhead bin. I need help to get it on a plane. Okay, it's that big. I have a huge portfolio case. People think I'm an architect. Okay, when I get on, or I'm holding some sort of Picasso painting when I get on the plane. But this is an example. This is the Washington. This is the Apple Cup game, Washington State, Washington, the final weekend of the college football season. And you can see there, that's the Washington State offense against the Washington defense. And flip it over, and it's just the opposite. And some of that information you can see is typed, and it may have come from other resources, but most of it is handwritten, and the anecdotal material looks like chicken scratch to you, okay? But it matters to me, and I know I wrote it. And if I wrote it down, I know it's true. I know I got it directly from the coach. I get so caught up in writing this and having fun filling it out. It really is fun. I mean, I think of my preparation time as fun time. But by the time the game starts, because I've written it myself, and this is purely generational, a lot of guys today can go on their computers and their laptops, dial stuff up, call the game right from there. I mean, a lot of them, a lot of great ones do. Not me. If I don't write it down, I don't commit it to memory. And I dare say most of this material never makes air, okay? But because it's there, because I wrote it down, because it's here, being armed with that kind of information, knowing that you know as much as you do about these two teams, gives you the confidence to speak with authority. And I think that's the real key, is commanding the audience into believing that you know more than you're telling. And that's the real key, is being armed with the preparation, but at the same time, knowing judgmentally what to use, what not to use in a given moment. So those are two factors for me that are absolutes: preparation and judgment. Preparation, no substitute for it, but then the judgment of knowing what hits the editing room floor. Because because you do this homework doesn't mean America needs to hear it. They only need to hear it when the time is right or when it's comfortable. If there's not a dead ball situation, story I want to tell about how this Samoan kid grew up and how he was commandeered by the Oregon offensive line coach, people don't want to hear that when we're in the middle of a drive, 50 yards, and the ball's at the 18-yard line. They're concerned about their team getting in. Launching into some sort of human interest story when the ball's in the red zone is not always the thing to do. So you got to be very, very concerned about editing yourself through having great judgment. And frankly, it takes a while for a lot of people to figure that out. And, I feel like people say to me all the time, Tim, you sound so vibrant, so energetic and enthusiastic. And the reason for that is I'm finally doing now what I always wanted to do, just games.